And we are live once more, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages. Welcome to the Greyhorn Pagans podcast. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my guest for today, Mr. John John White, better known as Crecganford. John, how are you doing today? Introduce yourselves to our viewers and our lovely listeners.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite. I'm John White. I'm on a YouTube channel called Crecganford, where I discuss mythology, normally around Indo European culture and tradition, but can go further afield if you wish. My specialities are in Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse literature, but I expanded from there over the years in independent research. And so, yeah, that's why I'm here, because you want to talk probably about Indo-European culture and tradition and mythology.
Yes. On the podcast, we very much specialize in all things old European, but I wanted to take a little further back to where the old Europeans come from. And first question, I guess, should we be calling it Indo-European or Indo-Aryan? Is there a difference between the two?
Definitely. So, well, it depends where you're from. How people define things can be a bit of an issue sometimes, but academically, when we say Aryan, we tend to mean Indo-Iranian, as it is a Persian term. Aryan came from Persia, and so Indo-Iranian. Indo-European means everything from Scandinavia down into India, along that lines. So, Indo-European, I know what you're talking about. Indo-Iranian, we're talking from the east half of the steppe. European, we're talking from the west half of the steppe, basically. And the steppe is where the Proto-Indo-European language began, and it is the people who spoke the Proto-Indo-European language that then dispersed and became the Indo-Europeans that we know today.
Okay, yeah, I've always had a little trouble with differentiating the two, because you'll hear about both, and you'll hear both mentioned, and some people, some content creators will talk about them like they're the same kind of people. So that's why I asked, because I mean, there's a difference in names, so
you do hear that, but yeah, I mean, they associate Aryan with a particular, I guess, genetic makeup of Indo Europeans, and I don't really, I'm not one to support that theory. It's Indo Europeans and Proto Europeans were incredibly diverse, and we can talk about that, and we can talk about their origins and how we know these things as part of this process. Yeah,
please. I mean, East and West. I mean, just looking here in Europe, East Europeans, West Europeans. Yeah, we're both Europeans, but we're very much different. How did that? How was that on the steppe, like way back in those days? How did?
So let's explain how Europeans became to be Europeans then. It's probably a good way. So 20,000 years ago, we had hunter-gatherers, normally associated with a term we call Western hunter-gatherers, which are people who didn't farm. They basically hunted and gathered their food as the days and months and years went on. Then we started to see farming happen around probably 16,000 years ago. We first started seeing domestication of crops, and probably about 11,000 years ago, there was a significant amount of crop domestication. So when people talk about farming, sometimes people think, we just started farming and got all our food from that. Well, it was a process that took thousands of years. I mean, we 5-10% of our food, 16,000 years ago, to 80% of our food 11,000 years ago. It took time to build the crops and work out how to irrigate fields and the like. So these farmers happened in the Near East. This all happened in sort of around Mesopotamia, Syria, Anatolia, so south East Turkey, Syria down where Israel is, and down Mesopotamia, and into Egypt and down the Nile. So all this was considered fertile land, the fertile crescent where we could grow things. And then as these populations, these cultures became more successful, they wanted to expand because the populations grew because they were successful. So where did they go? Some of them went along the coast into Turkey, into Anatolia at the time, and we see lots of different cultures grow up there. Then they go into Greece, into Crete, and then up the Danube into Europe. And by about 6,500 years ago, these Neolithic farmers are in southern Europe, and they've migrated there as families. So these cultures took groups of families along with them, and that created the diversity to breed and continue their lines. But they rarely bred with the Western hunter-gatherers. There was sort of no need. There probably was a little bit of trading. There probably was a little admixture going on, as we would call it. But they generally kept themselves to themselves. And then about 6,500 years ago, they stopped migrating into Europe because Europe didn't look like the Mediterranean. When you get to Austria and Switzerland and Germany, it's forests and the like. It isn't nice clay and
no. That's why the Romans really didn't like the Netherlands when they came here. It was all marshlands and swamplands.
So very different. So it took them about 1,000 years to work out how to farm in Europe. So you'll see this stop about 6,500 years, and then around 5,000 years, you see them progressing to mainland Europe. Now, at this point, the Indo Europeans have started pastoral farming. So what that means is they were really just keeping cows. They didn't worry about farming crops. They just worried about keeping animals. And the cow was the most important animal to them because it was a very useful animal. You could use all of its parts for something useful. Its bones, its flesh, its hide and the like. And so these Indo-Europeans were coming into Europe and they were trading with these Neolithic farmers initially. But then, unfortunately for the Neolithic farmers, what seems to have happened around 5,000 years ago is that these Indo-Europeans brought with them the plague. And the Indo-Europeans were pretty resilient to the plague, but the Neolithic farmers hadn't come across it before. And so we see an absolute decline of Neolithic farmers in Europe about 5,000 years ago, which created space for the Indo-Europeans to come in. Now, the Indo-Europeans are a very patriarchal society in the sense that in their family units, if the father died, the eldest son would inherit the father's land. And this is how you get kurgans and the like. You can get these burials one on top of the other. This is the father giving it to his eldest son, giving it to his eldest son. And that's...
we still do that.
Exactly. There's still a hint of patriarchy in the society today.
Fair enough.
So you'll see this. The eldest son thing still persists in some places. So what happens, though, is the youngest sons, what did they do if their father died? Well, they went off to warrior camp, you could call it. And so we have some evidence of archaeology of there being groups of young men forming these cults or these sort of unions that went around sort of practicing hunting and the like, and they went into Europe. Now, if you've got all these men, sorry?
Would that be the Mannerbunds, the warrior bands?
Yes, exactly. So they come into Europe, and what do? They haven't got any families. They haven't got any women with them. So they take women from the hunter-gatherers or from the Neolithic farmers that are around. And they've got no use for the men, so they kill the men, keep the women. And that tends to be what happened. And although people don't like talking about it, but that is the way of the world back then.
Yeah.
And so you immediately find the first generation of Indo-Europeans or some of the Proto-Indo-Europeans into Europe immediately breed with Neolithic farmers or with Western hunter-gatherers. And so the first generation or the second generation of Indo-Europeans is a mix. So there is no pure DNA. That is a fallacy. You immediately change, and there's lots of DNA evidence to show that various people that stem from the Indo-Europeans have a mix of Western hunter-gatherer, Neolithic farmer, and Indo-European. The only area where that isn't quite true is Sicily, which doesn't have much the Indo European piece. It has Neolithic farmers or Western hunter gatherers, but the Indo European piece didn't get there. So that's quite interesting. I think that's right. But the rest of Europe, in various degrees, you get this, and a very similar story happens. Although they didn't have any Western hunter gatherers in India and Asia, they had other groups, but you get a similar degree of a melting pot of things going on as the Indo Europeans go in through Persia and into India, and then some of them go into Asia and Siberia. That didn't go too well, but that's primarily because Asia had a lot of warriors on horseback there, so it would be hard for them to settle. But you do see that at the very earliest.
Yeah.
So the Indo Europeans, there were multiple phases of migration. It wasn't just one big migration, but the earliest migration tended to be a success. And those earliest migrations we see resulted in some of the population of Scandinavia as well as in Siberia. But then there's a second lot that happens, and that goes into Greece and into Persia. And we see this because the Proto-Indo-European language evolves over time. Mm-hmm. And we see that the stories told in Scandinavia and Siberia tend to have reflexes related to the Kentum part of speech, version of speech of Indo-European, and those closer to hand in Persian Greece was more Satem. And that's good. So we can tell by the way people speak and the stories they tell what phase of migration they were. So we can actually see there were multiple waves, and the earliest waves seem to have gone to the extremes, which would make sense, and the secondary wave didn't go quite as far. And that is how we get quite a diverse population in Europe.
Yeah, because you were talking about, being pure breed and pure mix and whatever. That's a very contentious point nowadays. Yeah.
I have no support for that. I mean, people tend to stick with people they know and like, and you can understand why that is, but there's always been diversity in humans, always. And that's the case. The Indo Europeans came here as males and then immediately found partners in other cultures. That's what they did.
I mean, if it's a group of just men, and for your biology says you need to procreate, you can't really be picky, if there are no other women around. It's like, well, here's a woman, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the Indo Europeans are a diverse bunch anyway. From India to Scandinavia, there's a huge array of people, and all amazing, great, amazing stories. Amazing culture, amazing ancestry, and so that is how we are. So it's important to understand that. But because of, your next question might be, how do we know that? Well, I've just told you. Yeah, you might think, oh, that's a great story, John, but how do we know these things? So, one, there is DNA evidence. There's certainly so. Since about 10 years ago, when we managed to start doing some really serious things with DNA analysis, we can start tracing DNA and can see which groups people come from and where they've mixed. They've got that. But we also, for my speciality, I deal with mythology. We can see mythological stories that have evolved and developed across these landscapes. Yeah. So, for example, if we talk about Neolithic farming myths, so the Greek have a creation. The Greek have a creation myth around where Uranus and Gaia, I think it's the Earth. So the Earth Mother and the sky. Uranus is the sky, and they give birth to Oceanus, the ocean, and then the Oceanus then castrates, I think, Uranus, and then but he then has children with his mum, and that's Kronos, and Kronos gets castrated and has Zeus and other children. Did you see this process?
Yeah, I've written the story on our blog, but it's been a while. What does fascinate me is that in so many creation stories all over the world, water is such a big aspect.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Okay.
So, but you get this myth. So what you find in Neolithic farming mythology is that you get a mother and father have a son. The son tends to kill the father, marries the mother and have a child, and that child tends to kill his father and marries the mother or the daughter, and then kills that. And you have 3 or 4 generations of this before you get order in the theology. and
Oh, wow.
and happen. So, and because we see that in Greece, we have an almost exact replica of that myth in Hurrian culture from Anatolia,
Mhm.
and we have and that seems to be an exact copy from Phoenician mythology. And so we basically see this myth has travelled from, so in fact, the Fertile Crescent, we're talking about when Neolithic farming started, through Anatolia. We see it going to Crete, so that goes through the Mycenaeans and Minoans, or the Minoans and then the Mycenaeans, and then into Greece. So we actually see this travel of this myth go into Greece.
Yeah.
So that sort of gives us confidence that people from the Phoenician society and from earlier, because they were then influenced by Sumerians and are like have pulled all the way through. And then we see real examples of this. So this is because the languages are different. We can't use some of the tools we use in Indo European mythology to work out the root. So because Indo Europeans languages all stem from the same language, there's this subject called etymology, where you can use science to basically say how words have evolved to different cultures. But we don't get that from sort of Sumer to Phoenicia to Hurrian to Mycenaean to Greece. That the languages are all different, but we see the story. And what we can do is we can trace some of the gods back. So we can trace the god of Venus, for example, in the Roman Empire to Aphrodite of Greece.
Yeah.
But what's interesting in Aphrodite of Greek is she doesn't appear in Mycenaean culture. The Mycenaeans have 11 of the Olympian gods, but they don't have Aphrodite. It looks like she has come from Phoenicia. And in Phoenicia, she's actually linked to Ishtar, who's linked to Inanna, who's one of the oldest mother gods there is. She's certainly well over 6,000 years old, if not much older. So we actually see these gods from this farming culture, and it tends to be and she is the god of the earth and the sky.
Yeah.
That has come to be this sort of mother goddess, or this love goddess, although she's not really love. I mean, people mistakenly think Venus is a love god. She's a passion god. So yes, you can have sexual passion, but you can also have passion for military victory, which is why you see her on so many Roman coins and the like with the emperor. So emperor one side, Venus the other side. That's not because he was all loved up. That was because he had passion for victory, passion for military success.
No, of course, and especially with the Romans. In Germanic cultures, that would be Freya, for example.
Yes. And the alignment isn't great with Germanic
No,
cultures. That's
not,
interesting.
It's not the same, of course, but
and we can explain that. So, and the way we can explain that is because of this migration of Indo Europeans. When I said there was in effect two waves, this early wave and this later wave. The early wave, it tends to be what has in effect influenced the pantheon of Scandinavia, and therefore Germanic gods, and they actually went into the gods of the Vanir. So my belief is that the Vanir are in effect the remnants of the Neolithic farming gods, and then the Aesir are the remnants of the Proto-Indo-European gods, but those gods are probably more aligned with Neolithic names that came up in the early times, rather than they adopted the Indo-European names, and that's because we get this sort of split. So you get the Indo-European gods reasonably well mapped into the Slavic area and the Baltic area. Sort of this. And then when you get to more Western Europe, you lose them. In the Germanic, in Germania, you don't see them directly aligned. You see a bit of Nerthus, which is again is Neolithic, and they talk about Manu and Twisto. So Manu is definitely an Indo-European primordial being. Twisto is cognate with Emir, and that means twin. So Emir means twin, Twisto, twin, twist like the two, and that's linked to Yamo and Jimo and the like. So we see this. I think that's what's happened is you've got the Neolithic farmers have come in, obviously gone into Europe. They've probably been pushed into Scandinavia when the Indo Europeans then came in, and then the Indo Europeans have come up mixed early on, which is why you've got a good, DNA amount or percentage amount of Indo European DNA in Scandinavia and Northwest Europe. And that's how they've synced their pantheon. And you tend to find these two pantheons exist in the Indo European culture. You see it in India as well. This sort of split up. So that's my view on that, on how those sort of pantheons and gods tended to be. But you get far more direct Indo European cognates and etymology within the closer to the steppe in the Caucasus from Persia into say Slavic and Baltic areas. And into India than you do into Scandinavia and to Siberia.
Yeah, I've always found that quite fascinating how the gods of Northern Europe, if you will, how they like correlate to the Roman gods, but it's not a direct reflection like Roman mythology, Greek mythology.
The same archetypes, but not the sort of archetypes are similar. You can align them, but you see the gods of Scandinavia are, I guess some people call them personalities, but to me they're like heroes. So if you went to battle, you would want to fight like Thor. Okay, so you want Thor in you. You want to be part of Thor. You want to be like Thor, and so therefore at that point you would venerate Thor to give you that. Yeah, if you wanted to be head of the village or tribe and have multiple children, you'd be Freyr. So you wanted that big energy that he had, and the like. So that's how I see it. Where you didn't necessarily get that same feeling for those more Mediterranean Indo-Europeans who tended to have gods which were very much for specific things, like gods for money and love and war. And that they weren't.
The Romans had like up to 200 different gods, and incorporating every other god that they found.
So exactly. So they weren't anti-gods when they came across other cultures. They always accepted them, and they often merged them. We see that in Britain. Some of the gods we know about were mergers of old British gods with Roman gods to create this. So
here in the Netherlands, you see that a lot too. Best example I can think of is the goddess Nehalenia. For example, we have found quite some Roman temples dedicated to Nehalenia. Well, she was very much a Frisian goddess.
Okay, that's interesting.
But the Frisians, there was like now it's just one province, but back then it was the entire west coast, like north all the way going down to west, which was considered Frisia, and the other like eastern Netherlands was more considered part of Germania. They were very two distinct peoples, and the Romans only came up as far as the Rhine River, because swamplands, marshlands, and it's a good border. It's a good good border to
But they did manage to hire mercenaries from north of there, and so what you'll find is that's one of the reasons why they had that attitude towards gods, is that if they restricted the gods you could worship within their legions, then that would cause disquiet amongst the many people they've got in there that aren't from Rome. So that's part of the process. I mean, obviously they still had Jupiter Maximus or Optimus Maximus to the chief god and things like that. But we see that.
And it was also very easy, so to speak, to become a Roman, and you just had to serve like X amount of years. I believe it was 40 years in the Roman army, and you could be a Bavarian, you could be a Frisian or whatever. At the end of your service, you got Roman citizenship and a piece of land, and you were considered a Roman. So and of course bringing the gods with them, because those are still the gods of their people. Always found that very very interesting. And you mentioned was it about the eldest son taking up the torch for the father? That's another thing you see you see in Roman culture. I think it's interesting how that just
it's
went
an Indo
down.
European tradition,
Yeah,
in effect, very,
yeah.
very, very patriarchal.
I've worked at a like historical, education park, if you will. I was working in the Roman era, if you will, and they always said that, or they taught me that the eldest son was always, taking up the torch from father, was going into like study with the father. If your father was a craftsman, you would be doing the same craft. But all the other sons, I mean, you only need one pottery baker, you only need one smith in the village. So all the other sons basically
Moved on.
just
Yep.
went into the army, because you always need soldiers, especially with the just huge expansion.
Yes, I mean there wasn't cities as such in the Indo Europeans. Cities had started being formed around the Near East, certainly, but it took a little bit longer for cities to appear that were influenced from the Indo Europeans.
Yeah, I mean
They were there, but that's another reason why they expanded so quickly. Because if you're breeding and having more kids and more kids, where are they going to go? They can only go outwards. So yeah, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. That attitude of patriarchy.
Yeah, well, it's a very patriarchal society. But on the other hand, the Frisians here, for example, or like just especially here in the Netherlands, it was very matriarchal, which I find quite contradicting. I wonder how that manifested itself. I mean, it's, of course, the mothers are important. There's always been a mother goddess and veneration
Absolutely.
for the mother goddess. And you see it in the myths as well. There's always the the man and the woman, or male goddess, female goddess, or just a female archetype, if you will. But I can't figure out, or haven't done any proper research yet into why like basically the whole of Europe was patriarchal and man just ruled, and then in Frisia in the northern Netherlands it was very matriarchal.
I'd be interested to see the evidence for that. That isn't something I'm familiar with, but I'd be interested to see what evidence supports that and when that came to be. So if it was like 6,000 years ago when Indo Europeans were coming into Europe, and you're saying it's matriarchal, that'd be really unusual. If it's like 2,000 years ago, just before Christianity or whatever, then that's less surprising, because things were starting to happen. Synchronicity of religions and cultures was starting to happen more.
No, I should ask some of my friends at Tribe of the Fox. They do a lot of Frisian, a lot of Dutch research, really good research. I guess I should ask them. We talked about the Aesir and the Vanir, and those being like very different tribes of gods, and now there are stories about them like waging a great war against each other. Like what are your thoughts on that? Because it's a very it's a topic that's been heavily debated. But they waged war against each other, and finally they made peace and coexisted. And a whole lot of people are saying no, that never happened. And then you have the other side. Like both voices are.
Well, it's only from an academic point of view, it's only mythology. Okay, to me, these things didn't really happen, so I would approach it from that point of view. So, so it happened because the mythology happened because it's been written down. So someone somewhere was telling those stories, and it'd make absolute sense if this was a Indo European culture hitting a Neolithic farming culture, and there was a clash, and this is the story of how the gods came to be. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. If you give it 2,000 years, 3,000 years, which you would, then you end up with the story you get, which is an absolute epic. There's some epic tales in the Poetic Edda. So yeah, and well, that's in Prose Edda, I think, isn't it? He mentions at the beginning, but I'm happy to believe that was a part of the mythology that would make perfect sense. There's no reason why he would necessarily want to adjust that. And you see these hints in things like the Jotuns that are again these monstrous beings or whatever you want to call them. And to me, they're almost like another population of people that have been sort of included in the myth. They're not. They weren't the Neolithic farmers, or they weren't the Indo Europeans. Perhaps they were the Western hunter-gatherers, or perhaps they were other tribes, the Sami tribes, or a mixture of anyone who was the enemy. They were just labelled this label. I mean, the dwarves or elves could easily be references to Sami culture, who were very artistic and could do some really incredible things. Perhaps, it's their way of creating stories about people to fit into that mythology, because that's what mythology is all about. It's about creating this sacred truth about how your culture and traditions came to be and why they should be. What's more interesting, and which we've lost, is the ritual part. So ritual tends to sort of inform us of the mythology being told. But what's happened is we literally have almost zero knowledge of ritual that happened in the Nordic cultures. Now people try and reconstruct it, but I'm very skeptical about much of this reconstruction, very skeptical indeed. And in fact, if people really wanted to reconstruct some of the things, they'd be doing some very different things to what I see.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Because we see it in the Rig Veda and things like that. I mean, we can see rituals such as the libation. So in terms of soma, which I equate to the mead of poetry, or the taking a libation at a ritual, they drink it, they urinate it out, and they drink it again, and then they vomit it out. That's what the priests do when taking the libations of summer. You don't see that happen in Scandinavian culture. I can't imagine people would want to do that.
No, even for ritual purposes.
It doesn't seem a healthy thing. Yeah, exactly. So,
exactly.
Even where do you go and which is right, and how do you connect it together? So, I'm a bit of a romantic in the sense that the aspect of the lifestyle, I mean, obviously it was really hard back then, really hard, but there's aspects of the lifestyle I admire, being one with nature and believing in a circle of life. So the Indo Europeans were very much what you take from the world, you give back some way, which is why there is sacrifice. That's a nice, that's probably the wrong word to call it, but that's a very understandable logic to keep the world balanced. And we seem, and I like that aspect, but we seem to have lost much of this, this ritual, and that's what I miss. Even the storytelling aspect, so the mythology aspect. So today, if you read a story, you get a book and you'll sit down and you'll read it, but no one told stories like that 2,000 years ago. There weren't books. You had a storyteller or multiple storytellers in a village, and they just didn't sit down and tell you a story. They acted it out. In some stories were ritualized. Certainly some of the poems in the Poetic Edda were almost certain were ritualized. So there was a whole aspect of telling the story with acting and theatre in a Viking hall with the well and the fire, and there could have been costumes and masks and cloaks and see
that very much in Roman and Greek traditions.
Exactly, very similar thing. I mean, that's why stories were poetry. They were easy to remember for that reason. And so, that is what I would love to be able to recreate. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do with the Crecganford channel. So hopefully we're starting to get some really good storytellers together. I'm going to try and do some live shows in the coming year or two where we can recreate this ritual telling of stories so people really see what it was like.
Oh wow, that would be absolutely amazing. I would love to witness that. Would love to be there. But that's one of the downfalls of having a oral tradition. If it gets lost, especially when invaders, whether that be the Romans or the Christians or or way earlier. If they come in and just go on a rampage, you lose a lot of the stories, or the people become so afraid to tell those stories because they know what's gonna happen.
It is. I mean, we've seen that recently. So I know a Romanian creator who talks mythology, and in our lifetime, Romania turned into a communist state. I believe there was some dictatorship, and they stopped people being religious. So no religious stories were told. None of the old stories were told. Christianity was stopped even, and it's only like in the last 15 years or whenever, when it's come back, that they've started to tell them. But what she's saying is they've lost some of the magic already, even in that short time. Some of the people don't realise the meaning of the stories. They don't know the story, but they don't necessarily. Its primitive function has been lost, and you see this. You see this in Romulus and Remus's story. So Romulus and Remus, the creation of Rome, that is an identical story to the Indo European creation myth. But the aspect of that myth has been lost, and the primitive aspect has been lost, and it's turned into this is how the city was created. So from two twins suckling a wolf, and one kills the other, it's a twin in a blood sacrifice, and Rome is created. And they're like that is in effect the Manu and Gimo, if you're familiar with the Indo European creation myth. If not, I can tell you that. Manu and Gimo suckling on a cow. Manu kills Gimo, sacrifices Gimo. Gimo becomes the god of the underworld. And Manu creates the world from Yumo's body parts. And so it's the same story, but they've lost that. And that's because it has been so diffused over time from the Indo Europeans. So you've got the early Indo Europeans probably coming down into Greece, into Crete, as the Minoans, and then the Mycenaeans, and then that populates Crete somewhat. And then you get another dispersal of Indo Europeans later on. And this is all on top of the Neolithic farmers that were already there, and you get this, and then that goes into Greece, into Rome, sorry, and they get this hodgepodge of potpourri of stuff, and you've got the Etruscans influencing them as well as the Greeks, and you get this mix, and so you lose that. So it's really difficult sometimes to really know what's going on, to understand what the myth really was, and so we've got to be really careful on that. So, but yeah, the all storytelling, even to lose it for a short time, can really affect the story. So you have to think, how much have we lost going back to the editors? And all my thoughts are that because storytelling was such a thing back then, hopefully not much was lost. Where in this modern day and age, for the Romanian sort of analogy I'm using, but in our a couple of generations ago, because that's in a time where there were books and television, perhaps we'd lost the art of old storytelling, so much more was lost in that period than would be expected otherwise. And so it's, we shouldn't be so afraid that we've lost stuff from much longer ago that was undocumented. We haven't. We can be reasonably assured that the poetry was reasonably accurate. I mean, there are some issues with it. We see it with differences in the Volaspor, and who knows what Snorri was doing in some of the stories he was telling the prose editor. There's certainly Christian conversion myths in there is added, without a doubt. But yes, that's one of my dreams, to be able to tell these stories properly.
Yeah, and it's also one of the biggest challenges facing the pagan community today. I mean, with every pagan creator, and it's a question I ask a lot in the tribe as well. Like, how are we always try to recreate the lives of our ancestors, and I mean, it's what we should be doing. Find your true ways, but how do you translate that to the 21st century? As you just mentioned with the ritual soma, it's not something we do nowadays, because we understand that's just okay, it's a ritual, but that's really not healthy, and it's not good for you, and it's downright gross.
But it depends what you're trying to be, though. So I see, unfortunately, lots of people who call themselves pagans or heathens, and they like it for the romance of the idea of the imagery, rather than what did it actually mean. I mean, you could worship anything, call it any god you want, but still have the same beliefs as your ancestors 2,000 years ago. The name of the god doesn't really matter. The what you're sacrificing or how you're doing it doesn't necessarily matter so much, although ritual is quite important in terms of remembering your religion, remembering the mythology. But what you really have to do is, why are you alive? What is your purpose in life? And that goes down. There's a really, I talk about this a lot. There's a poetic term we reconstructed in the Indo European, which says that death does not decay. Oh no, fame does not decay. So if you're famous, your name does not decay, which is in effect saying live a great life, and the poets will write songs about you. And if they write songs about you, your name will be remembered.
You could say it's one of the ways of being immortal, being immortalized.
Exactly. That is the way of being immortal. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That is immortality. I mean, so I've done a video on death, and I've basically said, I've said that in the end, but I said that you don't die when you die. You die when no one speaks your name again.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that. We have kind of a similar saying here in the Netherlands, like you die twice.
Yes.
Like you have your physical death, and the last time when somebody, speaks about you or thinks of you. And so live a great life, and you'll become immortal.
Just do something with your life that is purposeful, and reenacting things isn't, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do, but give your life a real purpose, make a difference to your family, to your friends. I mean, that's what the Hovermall is about. If you must be familiar with the Hovermall and the proverb, be kind to guests and serve them well. I mean, it's a really accurate book of sayings, even 2,000 or probably 1,500 years later, after it was first sort of written in its form. It's absolutely, almost spot on in terms of how you behave, how people are. We haven't changed as individuals, on how we behave. So just give your life purpose, and that's a harder thing to do nowadays. No one wants to go to war. No one wants to be in battle. No. Life has changed. We have become more civil. So how do you create a purpose for yourself when it's so difficult to do, when you can't do the things your ancestors did, and how they found fame? I mean, in the history books, you don't read about the YouTuber from 2,000 years ago. Not that there was YouTubers, but I'm never going to be famous, sort of thing. But how do you make that difference, especially today when there are so many stories?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good one. And you can't go out and just raid or try and conquer new countries. And that's what I meant with like how are you a pagan? How are you going to be a heathen in the 21st century? We don't longer live in in mud huts or on farms. We don't need to hunt and gather anymore. I mean, I can like take a 3-minute walk to the supermarket and just get everything I need.
Exactly.
Life is so much different, and I think especially the storytelling aspects. It's become a thing you see in movies or you read about in books. The campfire stories, but how many people would actually still go into the woods and tell those stories? Exactly. Like those situations in of itself have become a story. It's a story about telling a story.
Yeah, but that's the important thing. The things that remain today that were there 2,000 years ago or whatever are friendship and family. Friendship and family are important. So if we now have more time to be with our friends and family, then surely we should be having the best of times with our friends and families. But we're not. And I don't. What's gone wrong? Something is fundamentally flawed. If you no longer have to hunt and gather, why aren't we having better times with friends? Or perhaps we are, and we don't realise how bad it was back then. But that's really the achievement I want, is to have a great set of friends, we have good times, I love my kids and want to see them succeed. So it's that's where I think focus should be. If you want to be a pagan or heathen, concentrate on those values, the family values, the values of your friends, because everything else is the same. In this society, unless you're an outlier, unless you're doing something very different, like building your own log hut in the forest or living off grid, most people have to do what we call the 9 to 5 working routine every day. So it's the other bits of the day. Do something different in those parts of the day that bring community together. Like you talk about having a tribe or whatever. Have a community of people. Build them up and make sure you all work together to achieve something great you could not achieve on your own. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's become so important nowadays, with just about everything and everyone wanting to divide us and place us in certain, like black or white and gay and straight, and you're all you're all human, but you're all different, and you should be fighting each other, and you should be the same, you should be the same, like just one homogeneous society. But I think it's our differences that make us great. I mean, diversity is our strength. It's what makes us. It's what makes us people, just not the diversity that's being shoved down our
exactly
our throats right now.
Yes, it's one of the oddities in life. Like you get these, everybody should work together, but you see these pushes to try and split people up. It becomes a thing. You should, and there's no real. It's just human nature, I think. There is a. I don't know how to explain. This is my area of expertise by any stretch of imagination. But as I say, people naturally be drawn to people like them. I mean, you are some of the people you hang around with. Basically, if you hang around with you turn into an average of the people you're with. So that's why diversity is a good thing, because then you become broad-minded and aware of lots of things. Being stuck with a group of people that haven't got that, you're limited in your view. Now that may work for you, there may be benefits for you doing that, but it just doesn't seem. I want to learn more, I want to see more, I want to be more. And that's if you want to improve your lot in life, surely that's a better way to go.
Yeah, no, definitely. And on the topic of reenacting, like another thing that's that's really growing is LARPing, live action role playing. So like really reenacting, the battles and scenes. And do you see that like growing bigger, becoming
it
more
definitely
prevalent?
has grown. Yeah, so we see there's a great team of people. I don't know exactly where they're based. Hurstwick, I think they're called, where they reenact fighting from the Viking Age, and they do some really scientific studies. So, for example, like Vikings never fought on their horseback; they rode to battle and then got off their horses and then fought. And you fought with spears. No one fought with swords. Swords are too close to the enemy. You fight with something. They work out all these things actually, and that's from a academic point of view, that's really good. In terms of role play, you could it's something to do. I mean, if it's a way of educating people we didn't have a few hundred years ago, so from that point of view it could be a good thing. Absolutely. So but I see those things growing. You see that, and I don't know if that's a reaction to how the world has been, and as I say, in terms of having a purpose and finding something to do, and that. So I mean, you see it with cosplay as well. It's a very similar thing. Dressing up and acting out a fantasy, because that's in effect what you're doing. At least LARPing, if it is related to historic events, you have a sense of education with that.
Yeah, but like I really hope that that can become the the new theater of what we saw with the Romans and the Greeks and in the long
I
haul.
see what you mean.
I I think it has potential. I mean, LARPing, it's also used in a derogatory term.
Okay.
Unfortunately, oh, he's a LARPer. He's just, he's faking it.
But you don't really want to go into battle. I mean, that's the odd thing, because there was no audience to battle. Yeah, when these battles happened in real life, you
Yeah,
didn't have 1,000 people watching it. So, what is LARPing? Why are you LARPing unless you're doing it for yourself to get some educational reasoning on how to fight and how they've thought to get something out of it? How else? What are you
yeah. And I
doing?
think
Because
it's I think it's also um, like just another way to connect with like-minded people, people
yeah,
who share your interests, and maybe it'll become just another way of um, like truly finding out how our ancestors live. As you said, if that group does like that deep research into like how battles were actually fought, it's highly educational as well. And yeah, back then there may have been no crowds, 1,000 people watching from the edge of the forest, how two armies just completely
yeah, because
slaughter
it's
each
quite
other.
boring to watch a fight in a way. I mean, I've been to medieval reenactments before. Yeah, we have them in England at castles. You see,
Yeah,
50 men fight each other, and it's like it's not very exciting to watch.
I mean, a
Uh,
battle royale is
yeah,
it's great, but after 5 minutes, you get lost in the bodies. And
exactly.
but
Yeah. So,
those instincts are, they're still there, and I think that's, maybe that's
it's
another
one way
reason.
of doing it. Yeah, because some people
Yeah,
like that. I mean, I like martial arts myself, and there's nothing beats going into a boxing ring and boxing someone. There's a level of adrenaline and happiness you get from that you
yeah,
just don't get from maybe from LARPing.
yeah.
And
No,
it might be exciting. There's a levels, and different people want different things. But that's society today. You don't have to go to war, so that's the next best thing, I guess. If you're scared of getting hurt, yes, or
yeah. So like a martial arts tournament, if you will, that's, it's another way of going to war. It's another, survival
like the old
of the
jousting.
fittest, whose technique. Yeah, I really wish there was a bigger thing here in the Netherlands. Those medieval fairs, but I think we're just too small of a country
Really?
for that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I mean, we have them, but not with whole jousting tournaments.
Okay.
I think we're quite a small country, so I don't really think we have much place or like much interest
Yeah,
for
better things
that.
to do. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the jousting's really. I quite like watching jousting. That's because the whole powerful horses going in. It's rare that you get horses in LARPing, I'd imagine, because that's quite dangerous. You can't really run horses at people.
Yeah,
But to see horses in jousting, I quite like that. There's a lot of skill involved in that, I think. Yeah.
yeah. It would be that. I mean, that's the next step of bringing it back. Like
Yeah.
actually bringing back
But then
horses and
people will
riders on
complain about
horseback.
cruelty, won't they? So there'll be people who say, "Well, that's cruel to horses," and
Yeah.
And
That's
in
the
a way, it
whole.
is. Yeah, and exactly. So, what do? Then you have virtual reality, and everybody sits at home wearing little glasses and pretending they're on a horse, killing people. I don't know. It's.
I think that's
What do you do?
going about the wrong way. Like you're experiencing it, but you're like
You're
not
not really
really
exactly. I mean, there's nothing beats going
experiencing it.
outside.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
and I think
that's interesting. Yeah, that's it'd be interesting how the world develops, because it'd be a shame for people to lose touch with those real physical events and that. And say, if what can we remain from our ancestors in terms of ritual and reconstruction? Certainly
mhm.
go outside, go into it to get some sunlight, see the
Yeah,
stars, build a campfire, camp for a night with your friends, sing songs around the fire, tell stories around the fire, leave your phones at home, just be there as your friend. Do that for a night with your mates with some bottles of mead or ale or beer. That's if you've never done that, to anyone who's watching, just get some friends together and do that. And you may find it boring and got nothing to talk about. Well, that tells you a lot about why they're your friends then. But if you've got, in which case you need to make some experiences and you need to go places with your friends and see things with your friends and experience things with your friends. And that's what creates the stories. That's create stories, tell those stories.
Yeah. No, I think the need for that is growing. People are really starting to feel cooped up as well, within the, like as you said, the whole 9 to 5 cycle. There is really no such thing anymore as the company man. People don't work, or at least my generation, they don't work 20, 30, 40, 50 years for the same company, under the same boss. It just at a certain point just starts to itch, and they want more, they want something more. Like there is still this need to create a legacy, but we just need to find the right way of creating a legacy. And I think, as you said, just going outside, and I mean, it's become a meme, touch grass. It's become a meme at this point. But that also
outside here.
Oh yeah, I mean, gameplay sucks, but the graphics are great.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that's what you do that's reconstruction. Is our ancestors had to do particular things to live. We don't have to do that, but let's go outside and do things. So you've got something to tell a story about. You can go on a walk, hike up a mountain, and realize how hard that is, and down again. But at least you've got a story how he hiked up the mountain and wherever. Go kayaking down rivers for a few miles. Just live. That's why. Yeah.
Don't spend your entire life behind just whatever
watching YouTube.
unless it's Crecganford or Greyhorn Pagans, then
exactly.
you're more than welcome to binge it, of course.
Exactly. But that's my that would be my recommendation for anyone who wants to reconstruct stuff. Is don't worry about the religious stuff so much, because it is really an artificial reconstruction. Concentrate on the people you're with in that reconstruction and create stories with them, because then you'll naturally bond, you'll naturally have things to talk about, naturally want to do more. And that creates community, creates friendships, creates bonds, and allows you to tell stories, because those stories had to start somewhere. And they didn't come from nothing. Things happened for the stories to be created. So create your own stories. That would be a sign of a great tribe.
Even if it's just so that you have a story to tell around the water cooler
at
the office, it's
how did you get that axe stuck in your head, Jimmy? Well, I was out last night down in the woods telling the story. Yeah. That's those things. But that's what you want. You want that, Because then people remember you. Because then when you die, your friends will tell stories about you. And if they're funny stories, other people remember that story and they'll tell that story. There we go. We solved the answer to life, the universe, and everything there.
Create a legacy, have people talking
live
about
a life,
you
for
generations to come. I think we should indeed focus more on that. The religious aspect. It's great. It helps a lot of people, definitely. But our gods, the pagan gods, they are nature. They are in nature. They are expressions of nature. Nature is a expression of of the gods, of the divine. So want to experience the divine, go outside, hug a tree, touch grass, do something, be be that hippie that your parents are afraid
Exactly.
that you have
Appreciate what the
become.
gods have done. I mean, don't worship the gods. The gods aren't there to be worshipped. They don't. They don't listen to you. Like 99.999% of the time, they've, yeah. Only when you need something, talk to them, but never offer too much. Because you won't be able to pay it back. Exactly.
Balance. Just keep the balance.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
view.
and I mean, from coming from a academic, I think it's from an academic standpoint.
Yeah, I was going to say that was necessarily quite an academic point of view. We've got off a bit off topic, but that's my view. I mean, I have friends who are pagans and heathens and of traditional religion, and that is what makes the stories. The best times are when you're with them, telling stories, doing something, eating. If we go down like a cafe, so we have a full English breakfast at a cafe. Some mornings, and there's 8, 10, 12 of us there. When you've got that many lads around the table, it's great stories. We go away occasional weekends, great stories. Camping and big fire, good food. That's makes it.
It's that's the good life. It's the life we should all be striving.
Yes, I think
be striving for.
Yeah.
I think we should wrap it up here. I don't think it's
okay. Yeah, that's been an interesting conversation. Certainly didn't go in the direction I expected, but it was really interesting. Really interesting. I like that. It was a really nice sort of informal chat at the end, like last half of that. It was very good.
Yeah, just end it on a high point with some some good fatherly advice as well. So yeah, thank you very much. I for sure have learned a lot more and have definitely some thoughts that I had I have an answer to, or more to think about,
or to ponder. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I'll get my my orb and just ponder over them. And thank you very much. Where can
pleasure.
Where can the people find your content? Is there anything big you are currently working on?
Crecganford is where you find me on the YouTube channel. It's there. What am I working on? Hopefully I'll send out. I'll be doing a book review this weekend. Get a video on books if you want to learn about Indo European mythology. The next video is either going to be about Aphrodite or about a myth on living images. Several thousand years old. So about just various old myths and old gods is where we tend to talk about.
Yeah, I actually just saw your video about cats and how they were the gods and all of that. I mean, I got my I don't know where he is at the moment, but I got a big red, and he definitely thinks he's he's royalty, and should be.
They have a personality, definitely. Yes.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, but thank you very much for.
It's been a pleasure
for coming on. Yeah, no, it definitely has. This has been StijnFawkes from the Greyhorn Pagans podcast with Sir John Crecganford. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all who came into the live chat. Thank you all. Thank you to all who is listening to this, watching this after the live. And we will all see you next time. Thank you all. See ya.